I think you have to okay that it's being recorded. And I want to welcome you to the second session of Grape Camp for November of 2021. Let me talk a little bit about what we're going to do today. We're going to actually go into more detail about the peer review information that is required when you do a peer review. And so we glanced at it last week and I kind of described what we're doing or what is involved in each, but we're going to get into detailed instructions on the description, first of all, and then the evaluation criteria. And then I had asked you to look at a resource called How People Rationalize Fraud. And we're actually going to just do, for practice, a group peer review of that resource. And we'll just kind of either use the chat room or you can just chime in on it. But I just want you all to understand the thought process that goes through that when you're doing a peer review. And then I'll give you a little bit of what to do between now and next week. Last week, we looked at the peer review report in several different categories, several different disciplines. And we saw that the description had 7 fields that describe the material. So let's look at those fields, and then we'll also talk about the evaluation and observations. The very first part of the peer review is the overview. And even though it comes first, I normally wait till I've done the other 6 parts before I do the overview, because going through the other 6 parts gives me something to say about the material. So let's go on and look at what also we're going to be looking at. We also have material types, and I believe we now have 22 different material types in MERLOT. There's a list of them. When we first started, we did not have as many, but now we do. And we really don't have time today to go through each of those, but I'm going to be sending you some supplemental videos as well as a guide to doing peer review report forms for MERLOT. And in that guide, we'll look at the name of the material, for example, a case study. And we'll give you the MERLOT definition of what a case study is, and then also provide an example. So that will really help you understand what the difference, perhaps, if you don't already understand, but what our expectations are between the difference between an animation and a simulation. So hopefully that'll help you understand the different types. And then once you're a peer reviewer, they kind of come naturally. That you don't have to spend a lot of thought process, but I know at the beginning with all the different types, it can be difficult. So then we look at the technical requirements. And sometimes when you go to a resource, there may be specific plugins or something else that is required to view the material. And that's obviously of interest to the potential users of the resource. So we want to let them know what is required. Many of us are accustomed to having Adobe Acrobat on our computers, and also some kind of MPG player and a video player, etc. But keep in mind that MERLOT is worldwide. And so we don't have necessarily that ease in some other countries sometimes. So if you need a PDF reader, you want to put that in technical requirements. Sometimes it doesn't happen very often, but I know there are some differences between Fox and Chrome. Sometimes it's viewed well in Fox and sometimes it's not, and you have to use Chrome. If the author gives you directions for that, you want to include that in the technical requirements also. And then obviously if something's designed for a Mac versus a PC, you want to include that. The major thing to put in technical requirements is the browser that you use to access the material. So for example, if you're using Chrome, just all you need to put under technical requirements is what you use to access it. And that means to people that if they're using Chrome or whatever you say, then the resource should be easily readable. My picture is flickering. Is that happening to everybody? I'm sorry, that's really disturbing. I don't know what the problem is. Catching, I talk about how nothing distracting. This is obviously distracting because it's distracting me because I'm looking at it. So we'll ignore it. Another important issue are the resources. Actually, I'm using an external camera. Let me see if I can just, let me see if I can unplug that and then go back in and hook up with my other one. And we're not flickering. Okay, that was the problem. Okay, this is good. Okay, the learning goals now. And normally, many of us are accustomed now to writing learning objectives for our classes. Most textbooks today will have a list of 4 or 5 objectives for each chapter. So we're really accustomed to writing them. And we always want to write them from the perspective of the student. And when I'm writing a learning objective, I think the student will, and then we use some terms from the taxonomy that learn, understand, analyze, decide, whatever. So we use verbs and tell what knowledge or what skills the user will attain by using the material. Some of the biggest errors I see in this area is people will say the purpose of the site. And we're not really looking at the purpose of the site, but what the student will learn. And if you think about it from that perspective, I just think in my head, the student will, and then I use a verb to acknowledge what skill or knowledge they will obtain from using this resource. Sometimes the authors will have actually a well-written resource. The author will have learning objectives, but they don't always. If the author has learning objectives, just use those. That's fine. But overall, just use your best judgment. You're accustomed, when you're reviewing in your discipline, you're accustomed to looking at resources in your area of expertise. And so just use your best judgment of what knowledge the student will take away or gain from using the resource. Another thing is the recommended uses. And when I'm writing recommended uses, I always think about a faculty member perhaps who is new to teaching, or maybe new to the school or whatever, and we want to help them think about how to use a resource. A lot of faculty now are struggling with teaching online and knowing what to do with different types of materials. So if you face it from that perspective, you can think about how can it be used in the classroom? If it were me, how would I use this in the classroom? And we want to be thinking about face-to-face classes as well as online classes. So there are a lot of different types of ways that you can use the material. You can present it in class. You can assign it as homework. You can break into small groups and discuss the material and present it to everybody. You could role play it. In an online class, you could have a discussion forum, or perhaps you could break it into small groups in the online class and have them discuss it. And I've even had suggested about debates about the information that is presented. So just kind of brainstorm yourself when you're thinking about how to use this material. And I'm sure you'll come up with a lot of different ways that it can be used in a course in your discipline. Excuse me. Another important detail is the target student population. And we want to express it from the student population. Who is this best for? And we have 2 ways of describing it, both of which are important. First of all, the discipline area. And again, when you're reviewing in your discipline, you'll know what that is. It might be the major area of biology, or it might be used in a cell biology class. So be thinking about the course that you would be using it in from a discipline perspective, and also from a grade level perspective. So is it for undergraduates? Is it for graduates? Is it for first level courses in the discipline, or is it for majors in the discipline? And again, what we're trying to do is to help a faculty member determine whether this resource is good for their class. And so when we think about it that way, we're looking at the discipline as well as the educational level. And a resource could be used in several areas. It could be used in an introductory class. It could be used for majors too. So it just really depends. Also important is prerequisite knowledge. And we really want to be specific about this. There are, in some cases, courses that have to be taken prior to taking an advanced course in which this might appear. I know in business, we have Accounting 101 and Accounting 102, and you have to take Accounting 101 before you take Accounting 102. So if it's something, I believe the, I think, I always get them mixed up. I think financial accounting is taken first and then management accounting is taken second. And so if it's something in management accounting, you need to put in there that they should have knowledge of financial accounting. And it can also be what concepts or skills are needed. So if it's for a given class, what do I have to cover in class prior to being able to use this material? I'm not a biologist, but I always use the example of, let's say it's a biology material and it happens to do with cell biology. And perhaps I have to cover the basics of cell biology before I can use this in class. And again, that's useful information for the faculty member who is considering it, because they can say, well, this is a really good video, or this is really a good case study, but I can't use it really till the 5th week of the semester after I cover such and such. So again, with your expertise, you should be able to identify that. So we've gone over 6 of those areas, and now what we're going to do is go back to the overview. And the overview is very comprehensive. I say comprehensive, it's really only 3 to 4 sentences, but we want to give kind of a snapshot of what this material is about. So we want to talk about what the material is about and what subject matter does it teach. This is a good place to identify any particular features of the resource. Does it have 2 or 3 modules? Are there other features that are included? So it might be a case study, but maybe there's a glossary that comes with it, and maybe there's a quiz that comes with it. So it's mainly a case study. We only identify one type of material, but in the description, you can also put there's a great glossary to clarify terms for students. It might be a link to some further resources or whatever you want to say there. I always look at the type of material right up front. So when I'm writing a peer review report, I say this is and then it could be a case study, or this is a online course material or course module. And that identifies right up front what type of resource it is, and letting the faculty member who's thinking about using it be able to say, oh, okay, well, that explains it. I know what this is. We might look at the major learning goal. Lots of resources have multiple learning goals. So we might identify what is the major objective for the students in this class. And we might also mention the target student population. So what we really want is just kind of a snapshot for the faculty member to think about whether this is applicable to my class. And if it sounds good, okay, let me read more. And keep in mind, this is the peer review report. Now, I don't know what the reason is, but long ago we decided that this overview should be a paragraph form, and it should have complete sentences. So I always say 3 to 4 complete sentences that make a paragraph, and that's all that's required here. And that's why when I mentioned I do the other 6 fields first, I've got those all clarified, and then it becomes very easy to write that overview because I've covered so much of it. But again, it's just a first look at it in the peer review. It's right at the top, and that's what somebody's going to read first. Now, excuse me. You realize from looking at them last week that we do have, in addition to the description, we have the evaluations and observations. The evaluation is a number from 1 to 5. And you're going to see today how we come up with that, with those numbers. We don't just stab in the dark and say, I think it's a 4. We have a method of coming up with those ratings, and then observations. And if you think about the peer reviews we looked at last week, we had under observations the strengths, and I always look at that as what's good about the material, and also the concerns. What's missing? What would you like to see more of? And I think we looked at several last week that were 5 stars across the board, yet some reviewers still had a slight concern, and that's possible. When we're looking at strengths and concerns, the only way you can have no concerns is if you have rated it a 5. So if you have a 4.75, the question comes up, why didn't it get a 5? And that becomes your concern. And we do these, the evaluation and the observations in the 3 areas that we talked about last week: the quality of content, and that has to do with just the information that's presented. We don't care about the format of that information, but the information that's presented. And again, with your background and all of the teaching that you do and the learning that you do and the researching that you do, you're considered an expert in your field. And so you can evaluate the quality of the information that is presented. The second one is the potential effectiveness as a teaching learning tool. We always call this potential effectiveness. It's a lot shorter. And here we're looking at using this as a teaching tool. How does it engage the student, and does it help the student learn better? And that's why our requirements for being a peer reviewer is that you have taught or you're currently teaching in your discipline. And we do have some exceptions for that: library and information services, faculty development, instructional technology, because they're not really teaching, but they work with either faculty or students. So if you're in a discipline, you will have teaching experience. Again, in the past, we've had some people that perhaps got promoted to dean or department chair, and they're no longer teaching, but they do have that experience of teaching, and that's what we're really interested in. And then finally, the ease of use. And again, this is just how easy is this to use? What's it formatted like? What's it laid out like? So let's look at some questions that come up when we're looking at each of these criteria. With the quality of content, oops, I'm sorry, I already covered this without getting to the slide, sorry. But it is a number rating from 1 to 5 with 0.25 increments, and our observations on the strengths and concerns. And we do that for all 3 of the criteria. So quality of content, what are we looking for here? Again, your expertise will help in determining whether the content is valid and whether it's accurate. Is the information good information that's being provided? Is it valid compared to other types of resources like the textbook or research articles or anything else you might be looking at? Is it current and up to date? Now, this really depends on your discipline about how important the recency of the material is. I always use the wide variations of information technology. If I'm looking and reviewing an article that was written in 2010, and I'm in information technology, that's pretty old. That's 11 years. There have been a lot of advancements in that time. So for information technology, recency and currency is extremely important. On the other hand, for history, history doesn't change a lot. Sometimes there are new discoveries, but if I'm looking at a material in history, unless there has been some new development or some new finding in the field, even though it was written in 2010, it's probably accurate. And that's what we're looking at, is just the accuracy. So that's really field dependent. And it may not be on the fancy or use all the new bells and whistles that can be learned or that can be used in teaching and learning online. But we're not looking at bells and whistles right here. We're looking at the information that is presented. Is that accurate? And that's what you should be judging if you're in history, obviously, and then also in any other discipline. So you'll be familiar with your field. You'll know what is important. You'll know what is an up-to-date version is very important, and you can make that decision. One other thing, some of our sites or some of our resources in an attempt to help faculty and students may contain links to other resources. Now, you don't have to evaluate those resources, but at least take a look at them. And if it's think about the validity of the link or the material it's being linked to. If it's a journal article, you can be, it's been vetted, it's been peer reviewed. So I think I would consider that a high quality link. But if somebody just merely did a Google search and it's linking to a bunch of different types of information, everything is not necessarily true on the internet, as we all know. So that's not going to be as high quality as perhaps something that's linked to a discipline-oriented resource. So again, you don't have to evaluate that source, but hit the link and just check it out and see what it is actually linking to. Now, when we're looking at potential effectiveness, we're going to put the accuracy and validity to the side right now. And we're going to be thinking now about using this in the classroom. And think about how this resource that you're looking at could enhance the learning of the student. It would help them learn better. Does it engage the student? Does it create an interest in learning? Does it motivate them to learn more? And again, having that experience in the classroom, you should be able to judge whether it will engage the student or will it capture their attention. Another thing that we think about in potential effectiveness are learning styles. Now, you don't have to be an expert in accessibility or anything like that, but be thinking about if perhaps it is a video, is there a transcript for somebody who doesn't learn or has a hard time learning when they're watching something and hearing it? Is there some written material that comes along with it? And be thinking about how different learning styles would react to the resource that you're reviewing. Now, quality of content, potential effectiveness are, I think, the hardest ones to determine. Ease of use is pretty easy. Basically, what we're thinking about here is now we look at not necessarily the bells and whistles, but how easy it is for a student to navigate the site. Does it have a table of contents if there are multiple pages? Does a student know where to go? Do they have to hit the back button? Can they navigate around? And it just has to do a lot with how the student moves through the material. Is it clearly designed? I know I always laugh about this because when MERLOT, if you go back in ancient history, and I think there are some website archives available online, when we first came out as MERLOT, we had every color of the rainbow. It was red, yellow, green, purple, everything on the web page because we wanted to attract people's attention. Well, we've learned as we went along, we did some user studies on it, or usability studies on it, and we realized that not everybody can read those colors. Some of them are too bright for people to interpret them. And so we want to be thinking about the colors that are used. I used to use an example. I don't use it anymore in class, but there was a professor, and I think the material is still in MERLOT in the business collection, but he had designed a website, and his background color was kind of a lavender color, and then everything was written in a dark purple font in bold. And just the contrast between the background and the font was hard on the eyes. And I could see a student trying to use this resource, especially late at night or something, and just having a hard time viewing it. So we want to think about the simplicity of the website. We also want to think about any kind of movement on the website. anything like my video, or initially when I was using my other camera, my video was flickering and it caught my attention. And I'm the one that's talking. So those kind of things can really hinder a student's ability to learn. Our biology editorial board, we have our own little portals within MERLOT for each discipline. And biology used to have this green, it was an animation, it was a green frog that was jumping up and down. And it was cute, you know, you go to the biology page and there's a green frog. But I found that whenever I went there, every time that frog jumped, it caught my attention. Sometimes professors will have, they're trying to sell a book, or maybe they're trying to sell space on their website, and you might have links appear to something else, or to buy a book or whatever. That can take the student's attention away from the content and really have an impact on their ability to learn. So be thinking about that, and be thinking about, some sites are interactive, like maybe you take a quiz. Does the student know the answer? They answer a question and they get immediate feedback, or do they have to wait till the end to get the feedback? Or worst case scenario, they have to leave their email and the person administering the quiz gets back to them. You know, if there's interaction, is it immediate? Does the student have to wait, etc.? So those are all things that probably anybody could judge about. You might even ask your children, who are probably better technically than some of us are, what they think of the site, and you might get some judgment from them on things like navigation, etc. So those are our 3 criteria, and then we do have one other category, and I don't know if we looked at any peer reviews last week that have these, but this is optional information. And first of all, there are comments that can be included in the review. So let's say that you have a comment that you'd like to add to the review, but there was really no place on the peer review report form to say it. This is your opportunity to say it. And it might be something positive, like my students really reacted positively to this when I used it in class. It might even be a kudos to whoever created the site. Just anything that you want to have added to the peer review. Then the second one is comments to the author. And if you remember, our process in MERLOT is that we have 2 individual reviewers complete their reviews, not knowing who else is doing it. Those go to the editor, and then the editor does a composite review, and we send that composite review to the author for their approval. Well, if you want to make a comment just kind of for author's eyes only, I mean, the editor would see it, but it's really directed to the author only, you can include a comment in there. It could be a suggestion. It just could be a, you know, great work or whatever. It shows you spent a lot of time on this site. Whatever you want to say, it could be a correction. I found an error here. You might want to consider changing that. And that only appears on that composite review that goes to the author. When we publish the review on MERLOT, the comments to the author do not appear. The comments to be included in the review do appear. So that's kind of the difference between these. And both of these are optional. It's only if you feel you have something more that you want to add to it. Just, you know, comments on how great it is, or anything else that you see fit to comment on. Now, I've gone over a lot of information. And I'm going to be sending you, after today's session, a guide to doing peer review reports for MERLOT. And it has all of this information. It also has examples and maybe some questions, you know, to clarify part of it. So I always recommend that if you have the capability of doing it, you can pull that up as you're doing a peer review and just clarify what's needed in each section, or it's something you might want to study before you do the peer review. We just want you to have it handy in case you have any questions. You can always obviously email the editor, or you can email me if you have any questions, but we want you to just have some tangible resource and material to use as you're doing this, as you're doing the peer reviews. So let me stop right there and see, I've gone through a lot of material. As I said, I have this guide that I will be sending out to you that will further discuss some of the information on there. Do any questions come up right now before we actually go to do the peer review, the group peer review? Anybody?
More so out of here. As we're doing this, do we have a sheet to follow along, or? Yeah, okay,
exactly. Cool. And that's what we're going to be looking at next. Yeah, and that, I mean, that's always a question. You know, you went through all of this, and how do I write that out? We have what we call, and that's a nice lead in. I hope you all have looked at how people rationalize fraud. It's a short video. And what we're going to do now is we're going to do is look at this peer review report form. And here it is. Let me just get up to the top a little bit. I've already taken the liberty of setting it up, but this follows the review through. And this is a Word document. All of these fields are expandable. What we normally do is put the name of the learning material. We also have two different URLs. If you recall, there's the URL where it's found in MERLOT, and that is the material detail URL, but they always point somewhere else. And so that is the learning material URL. This particular one happened to be a TED Talk. And so that is the exact URL to get you to the resource. Now, I covered this last week, but if you want to use this in your course, you don't need to come back to MERLOT. You can just pop this learning material URL right into your syllabus or into your online course or whatever. There's no need to come back to MERLOT. We want to help you find materials. And so that's basically what we do. I just have my name here. I have the date. I don't really know how long it took me to do the review because I haven't done it yet. So what we're going to do is look at this description. We just went over the 7 parts of the description. And just to kind of tell you what's going on here, the things in blue, or the words in blue, are what it's called. And then the information in red are just kind of some hints, like this should be written in complete sentences and be a paragraph. And then in green, I think I mentioned that a number of years ago, the Tennessee Board of Regents was interested in doing mobile apps and peer reviewing mobile apps. So we created this green information, or green directions, I guess I should say, for mobile apps only. We're really not reviewing them that much anymore, so we can just kind of ignore that and just be looking at the blue and the red. Now, let's say we're ready to do the peer review. We've played the video. We've probably played it a couple times and jotted down notes of things that we want to say about it. I'm kind of a paper pencil person, and sometimes I'll just take a paper copy of the peer review report form. And when I'm going through the material, I'll jot down things that I want to say when I come back to it, and just keep track of it that way. Other people are very good at just taking notes right on the form itself and then going back and turning that into an actual peer review. So it really depends on your work style. But we're going to skip overview because we mentioned that that we do that, excuse me, we do that after we have covered the other 6 parts. So for the time being, I'm going to skip that. And I'm going to tell you that the type of material, we've got them all listed here. This is a presentation. So I'm just going to type presentation in there. We only need to identify it by one of these issues here. It might be a presentation that has a quiz or a glossary. I mentioned that in the overview. The main type of material is what we put in here, and it's just a simple phrase. We don't have to say it's a video presentation because we've probably said that in the overview. So I'll just say presentation. Technical requirements, I'll say I used Chrome. Oops. Since this is, it's really a YouTube video, I believe. And you will see how bad my typing is also. Spell. Now, this is where the thinking part comes in. So I'm going to ask you, what type of what would be a major learning goal? And be thinking about the student will. And in how to rationalize fraud, what will the student learn from that?
Do you want us just to speak it or type it
You
in the
can
chat?
speak it, type it in chat, whatever you feel more comfortable with.
Okay, this is from recollection. I recall like the student should be able to define at least a couple of different types of fraud. I know there's some specific ones, but.
You're correct. It was different types of fraud, if I remember correctly.
We can identify fraud triangle. I think that's what you're referring to, right? And they are different types of fraud. Okay, what else will the student learn?
False insurance claims.
Analyze why people may commit fraud. Somebody said something about insurance. What was that? How about understand the impact of fraud? And maybe understand the extent. You know, we read things in the papers all the time of fraud in the world. So very quickly, and just, you know, and quite frankly, I'm like, I haven't looked at that video for a long time. I probably need to go back and refresh myself too, but we've come up with 5 different learning goals and learning objectives just by thinking about what the student will learn from it. I would say probably the major one would be identifying the fraud triangle, but we do have other reasons for listening to this video. Now, recommended uses. How would you recommend this if you were, and I always say, you know, this is actually an accounting resource. But if you're talking to students about jobs or workplace behavior in whatever field, in nursing, in lab work, in the corporation, in schools, whatever, they need to understand fraud. They need to understand what can happen because it happens at universities, it happens everywhere. So let's say that you want to use this in one of your classes where you're talking about the workplace. How would you use it?
I would use it as an in-class discussion.
Okay, so we can play it in class and discuss. We could assign it as homework. Okay, how about group discussions? It's kind of like teamwork, like Merlot said. Or if it's an online class, you could use the discussion forum. So it's versatile. You know, we can use it a lot of different ways. And it really would be up to you how you choose to use it. But can you see the advantage now? Let's say you're a new faculty member and you've got this 7-minute video and you say, well, what the heck do I do with it? We've got a number of alternatives. They can look at it at home. They can go back and discuss it, just kind of giving them hints about what they might want to consider. Now, target population. Keep in mind, we want to identify the level as well as the field. So this was designed for entry-level accounting students. Can you see any, or can you think of any other type of class it could be utilized for?
Yeah, any business class.
Okay.
Also ethics and ethics
Oh,
course.
excellent.
Oh, yeah.
In any profession, really. Y'all blaming business for fraud, huh? I think there's fraud in nursing, you know, other fields too, don't forget. I'm joking. So, you know, what we're looking at again is it's designed for an accounting class, but it's simple enough. It doesn't really, other than speaking numbers and all, you don't have to have any accounting really to understand it. So it's really just kind of a good stepping place, I think, for discussions about fraud and dishonesty and ethics in whatever field you're going to be in. Now, prerequisite knowledge, I don't think it requires anything. So I'm just going to put none here. None. Oops, if I could spell it correctly. Okay, now let me move back up now to the overview. So I've used phrases here. These are not complete sentences. I've used phrases, and I come up here, and what I'll say is this is a presentation that discusses the fraud. Oops, I ought to put that in capitals because that's fraud triangle. See, it's hopping around on my screen. I don't know what it's designed for accounting students, but can be used in any discipline. I'm making spelling errors. I'm just going to let them go. It can be used in a variety of ways as a resource. Now, this is our first time through, so I've got spelling errors. I'm going to come back and change those. But this is just kind of a first stab at what do I want to say? And this might be my, jotting down by hand or jotting down here. Now, that covers the description. So we've got the 7 fields, they're all covered. That's the easy part because it's all, we're not giving, this is a great video presentation. We're not weighing judgment on it there. Now we begin to weigh judgment on it. And what we have here is what we call a Likert type of scale. Let me just expand this a little bit so you can see the rest of it. Yeah. Okay, it's a Likert type of scale. It's not a true Likert scale. And what we look at first is the quality of content. And what we're going to look at are these 5 different, or actually 6 different categories: strongly agree, agree, neither, agree nor disagree, disagree, strongly disagree. And then we have this NA, which is kind of a catch-all. We're not able to identify it for a reason or another, or I'm not able to assess this statement. So let's just go down here. And when I had a graduate student who designed this with all the colors and all, and I've just covered not using a lot of colors, but we still use the colors just to differentiate. So let's think about this resource, the how people rationalize fraud, and we say it's clear and concise. Now you can either speak out or type in the chat room. Probably chat room would be easier because everybody can come up with their own opinion and we're not interrupting anything. But just put SAANDSD, and we'll just see. Okay. Okay, so strongly agree. I've got a couple of strongly agrees. Again, we're doing a group thing here. So what I'm going to do is put an X in that box. Does it provide a complete demonstration of the concept? Again, you're not accounting, but good point. You're asking whether it's the whole lesson or just the video, and really it's the whole lesson because there are additional resources in addition to the video. Okay, we've got some complete, and you may not, because you don't know about the fraud triangle, it might be hard to determine whether it's a complete demonstration of the concept. But I think by seeing it, you kind of understand that. Demonstrates a core concept grounded in the discipline. I'm going to strongly agree there as a business professor because it is an important issue in accounting, I know. How about, is it current and relevant? So yeah, it's a very current issue, I think, for anybody going out in the workplace to understand the issues of fraud and what, you know, they could, I mean, there's so many different examples in politics and companies and everything. Supported by appropriate research. Now, I give this, I dink it here for strongly disagree, because they're using a lot of figures, data, and there's really no citation of where that data is coming from. And that's how I would fault I think the major downfall of this particular resource. It doesn't really say where it came from. So I think that, you know, just a list of citations would be very, very helpful. Again, that's an academic point of view. Is it self-contained? Can it be used without requiring an assignment? Yeah, we've got some essays here, so I'm gonna. Does it provide accurate information? Got some essays. Is it flexible? It can be used in several situations. Okay. Includes an adequate amount of material. Now, once again, from the perspective, I forget when this resource was created, but they're citing different instances of fraud. I would love to see kind of an addendum with some of the stuff that's gone on, you know, in the 2010 plus, and some of the things. Otherwise, I would say the faculty member may have to go and look some things up, or better yet, turn that into an assignment and have the students watch the video and see if they can come up with some current, you know, newspaper article or something about current fraud. So I'd just do an A here because of that. I think if I were presenting this in class, I'd have to do a little bit of extra work, I think. Does it summarize the concept well? It's kind of wishy-washy here because I don't think it really does summarize it. So I'm just going to give it an N. And integrates the concept well. And I don't think it was really meant to integrate it into anything. So I'm going to just, this is an NA, so I'm not really even going to use that as a statement to judge it. And then finally, overall, the quality of content is very high. What would you say to that? Okay, I've got some essays in there. Okay, now all we've done is just check mark the boxes. And in your video that you'll be looking at between now and next week, obviously you want to do a mathematical evaluation of it. And we normally have 12, I think there are 12, let me just. There's 12 statements here. And so this one we're not going to count, but we're going to add everything up and divide by 11. And we'll come up with an average. And I'm just going to eyeball it here. I'll probably say 4.75 maybe. I feel a lot better when you actually calculate it, but we're just going to go on that. Now, what's really a good feature? You know, what's positive about this material? Now, here's how, you know, if you're struggling to find out what's positive about, look up at what you gave 5s to. And just kind of reword it. We don't want to say it demonstrates a core concept rather than a discipline, but we can say other things about it. It's clear and easy to understand. It can be used in a lot of different situations. I'll just say some of that. I don't know where that came from. And I could probably come up with some others just looking back on this, you know, it can be used in a lot of different situations. And so that's one of my hints for if you're struggling for something to say. Then we come down to the concerns. And of course, my first big one is needs no citations. That's a big concern. I think what I mentioned is the instructor they need to update it with supplemental information. Again, that's something I would assign to the students. Normally, what we like to have is 3 to 4 statements for each one. And again, if you're struggling, look up to what you you rated highly and or not so high. So try and do 3 and 4. The only way you can have no concerns is if you have a 5.0. Because if here I just give it 4.75 and I say there are no concerns, the question comes to mind, why didn't I give it a 5? So that's then answers the question about what the concerns could be. And there may be some concerns that you think of while you're going through it also. So, think about that. So what I want to do, we're kind of running out of time, but I want to look at how the other 2 categories are organized. We're not going to go through these, but we're looking at potential effectiveness now, and we have the same sort of thing, Likert type of scale, and we just go down here, identifies learning objectives, identifies prerequisite knowledge. Obviously, a very good resource would have the learning objectives. They will say what you need to know before you do that. And so we think about each of these. We've got the ratings here. We've got the NA for when you're not able to evaluate it or it's not really applicable to the material. One of the ones here can be used to measure student outcomes. Well, the video itself cannot be used to measure student outcomes, but there are links to additional material that we might have a quiz or something on. And just as with the quality of content, we've got the strengths and the concerns, and then we come down to ease of use, same thing. A lot easier to evaluate, it's easy to use, clear instructions, engaging, of high design quality, meets accessibility requirements. Again, we're not experts in accessibility. If you have some knowledge in accessibility, you can certainly comment on that. And again, some of these are apps, so we're not going to look at that. And we have the strengths and the concerns. And then we summarize our ratings. So we started with a 4.75. And then I add the other 2 ratings for it, and I'll come up with, let's just say, we haven't done them, but I'm just going to say a 4.5 in here because I've summarized it. And then I can also add comments that what I might say, I'd suggest assigning students the task of finding a more recent resource. Can't spell. And then if you just want to say something to the author, you can do that too. Now, again, this is just kind of jotting down. This obviously is not in major format, but it's giving us an idea of what the ratings will be. We then want to go back, obviously, maybe look at the video again, explore the site, and go back and kind of plug in for some of the written things here, the strengths and concerns. Going back over it a second time may also identify, now that you're thinking about it, some other strengths and maybe some other concerns. With that area, you can never have too many strengths and concerns, but we'd like to see a minimum of 3 to 4, unless it's a 5.0. And I think some of the ones we looked at last week were rated 5.0, and yet they still had concerns. So that's always a possibility. Now, as always, what I recommend you do is spell check it and grammar check it. It's not perfect, but obviously the way mine looks, it's definitely needed. So, spell check it, grammar check it before you finish the final report, because it takes a load off of the editor of the discipline if you've spelled things correctly. And again, it doesn't always catch it, but it really takes the pressure off the editor. Okay, anything anybody want to say about this peer review report form, or any questions that you might have before we go to homework?
I am just going back to that question of adequacy. Is it adequate? If you can scroll up, adequate amount of material. That is just, I'm having a hard time getting my head around that because that seems very proportionate to the size of the
Oh, absolutely.
resource.
I just think of it adequate to explain the fraud triangle. Is there enough information? I'll just use that as an example here for students to understand the fraud triangle. Now, my only reason there for dinging it is, just to an A agree, is that I personally think to make it more relevant for students, it needs to be updated. So that's one of the ones I would consider currency being important for students to understand, because some of the cases they're talking about, they've probably never heard of. And so, is there enough? Has the author of the resource provided enough material for the student to learn? And that was just my personal judgment. You may feel differently. And that's the beauty of having a lot of different peer reviewers and having 3 different people look at it during the process. Is you may disagree with me. You may decide something else. Does that answer the question? You're still not comfortable.
Yeah, it's just, I guess I've been looking at a lot of, sites that do ESL grammar, and they might be really adequate for the things they address, but not adequate for a comprehensive site, and so there's just this kind of,
I would mention
it's
that.
just like, what are they setting out to do? What's the scope of their goal, I guess? And
then looking at learning objectives or learning goals, what was, is this just supposed to be an overview of ESL?
Right.
Or is this something that students are expected to learn a lot from?
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Thanks. This is
quite welcome.
fine.
And again, it is a judgment call on your part, but you're the experts. So that's why we put it in your hands. Okay. Homework for next week. Couple different things. I'm going to be sending you this guide for writing peer review report forms. It's a Word document. I think it's a PDF actually, but I just say create a file on your computer called MERLOT and put that in MERLOT so you'll always have it. And then I have links to supplements 3 and 4. Now, the big thing now is that I want you to go and do a practice review. There's no grading involved. It's just kind of to see if you think about it, what you're doing, or if we need to maybe explain some more. But what I want you to do is I will be sending you an empty peer review report form and just go in and do it. It's not, this is not graded. It's not pass fail or anything, just for your practice in case some other questions come up. And if they do, then we can talk about those next week. This is, again, another business material, but it's sexual harassment. And obviously, that can occur anywhere too. It's workplace oriented. I used to do webinars for faculty about sexual harassment at the university with students and other workers and everything. So it applies to any job. And if you look at it from that perspective, you're preparing students to go out in the workforce in nursing or biology or whatever. So approach it from that perspective. It's a very short video. And I will send you the link to that. And then I'll also send you the copy of an empty peer review report form, and just do what you can. If you don't manage to finish it, because I know faculty are overloaded at this time with things. If you don't manage to finish it, don't come to class anyhow. Don't worry about it. I still want you there because we're going to talk about how you then submit it to MERLOT. And after next week, I'll go over where do you go from here. And it's a very, very easy process from then on. So just if you have questions during the week about the video or anything else, let me know and I'll be happy to answer them. Okay, any questions right now?
I have a question.
Yeah.
When I was looking over this site, especially in the nursing section, I'm curious. A lot of the material will say a date that it was submitted, like,
Right.
I don't know, 2010, 2011. And then it'll say modified in 20 or 21. But it's actually still really out of date. Like, it's still the material from 2010. I don't know how it's been modified, so I'm just curious.
Some of the modification can be, and this has happened to me, the website changed and somebody says, oh, this is a broken link. And so we have to then go out and find it. So any change that's made to it, maybe the person who submitted it put it, and we run into this problem all the time, like sexual harassment. They will have put it in every single discipline, and it really doesn't belong in every single discipline. It's probably more of a management HR issue. So it would belong in business, and that's where you can find it. So sometimes I will go in, and if they put this, for example, in science, I'll take it out of science, but now I've modified that material detail, and that means it's changed somewhat, and that's why it comes up as modified. Any changes to it, not necessarily updated, unfortunately, but something has changed about the description, or it's normally who it pertains to, whatever.
Yeah, that, I mean, I was looking for, I was looking under nursing, and I was reading stuff and going, this has been like, is so outdated that we've had 3 or 4 different editions since then. So
You have the ability, when you're peer reviewing it, to mention that, but also when you're looking at it, go to those member comments.
yeah, I did.
Oh, good. Okay, because that really helps. And unfortunately, we've been around for a long time. We do have a lot of material that may have been peer reviewed back in 2010. We just don't have the people to go back. I'd love to be able to go back and, say, well, this is really outdated or whatever, but that's you're in the field and you've added that comment to help other people understand, nursing practices have changed, or whatever. Does that answer?
Okay. Yes,
Okay.
thank you.
Okay, great. Well, my battery just went on, and I'm running out of battery, so I don't want to go much longer. And we are out of time. I went 3 minutes over. I apologize for that. I normally don't do that. Any questions at all?
I have a question, but it's it can wait.
Okay. Or email me. You can do that too. Okay, let me just stop the recording. How about